Hello and welcome to the Political Circus Weekly Podcast. I am your host, Mike Ursery, and this is episode number 13. I'm just going to jump straight into the episode this week. Every week, I bring you a podcast where I try to highlight the ridiculousness of people in the news, particularly people in the government. And these are people like Donald Trump, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer. The list goes on and on. Our government is ran by people who say and do outrageous things. You know, I like to keep up with what happens in the news, and I like to talk about the things that happen. It's why I started this podcast. But in this week's episode, I'm not necessarily talking about people in the news. Rather, this episode is about people who deliver the news. And by deliver the news, I mean they put their own spin on it, and they try to deliver it in a way to fit the narrative they want their viewers to hear. And there's a big problem with that. Look, journalism is not hard. Sure, there is a storytelling element involved, and that requires some level of talent. You have to be able to tell a story, whether it's through writing or talking on TV or speaking on the radio, whatever. The field isn't fit for everyone, obviously, because if it was, then everyone would be a journalist. But there's more to it than just a storytelling aspect. Before you can deliver the finished product, there are a lot of things that need to be done. You have to find facts. You have to find information that supports those facts. You have to verify what you hear from sources, and that requires a lot of vetting. Whenever you're telling a story, you have to be able to tell who said what or who did what and why it's important. If what they said is true, you have to show why it's true. If what they said is false, you have to provide factual information that shows why it's false. One thing about journalism that you rarely see from mainstream media outlets is that it's only reporting. Everything else is up to the consumer. Remember when Fox News had this slogan a long time ago? I think it might have been around 2003, maybe even further back than that. But they had a slogan for a while, and it was, "We report, you decide." Fox News doesn't do that, but those words, "we report, you decide," are what journalism should be. But what you have instead is a bunch of media outlets telling their consumers what they should think. This is what we think, and this is also what you should think. And anyone who doesn't think this way is wrong. By now, everyone should already know about the incident at the Lincoln Memorial after the March for Life rally. I'm not going to go over every single little detail about that, but everyone knows about an all-boys Catholic school in Kentucky called Covington Catholic. Everyone knows about a Native American man named Nathan-Phillips, and everyone should know about the confrontation between Phillips and the students who go to that school. In the beginning, people didn't know about what had actually happened. See, they were told something completely different in the very beginning. I'm not going to go over everything from the very beginning. Everyone should know about that by now. What I am going to do is I'm going to begin with what had happened right after the story first went viral. And when this first started making the rounds, all we saw was this viral video of Nathan Phillips beating his drum and singing, and nick-sandmann, who is one of the students who attends Covington, was standing in front of him with this smirk on his face while wearing a MAGA hat. No context, no backstory, no explanation for how this scene was created. Instead, we were told that this was a depiction of racism and white supremacy. The first outlet to report was BuzzFeed. When you look at their story, they reported this as young men, nearly all of whom are white and wearing pro-Trump gear, chanting and mocking the man on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. These kids were wearing MAGA hats. We've had some hot takes from people about those red hats this past week. Shortly after, and by shortly I mean less than 2 hours, this video went viral, and it was all over social media. News outlets, from the New York Times to Fox News, every left-wing and every right-wing outlet, everyone was spreading this. It was still only the short viral video with nick-sandmann smirking. Still, no context, no backstory. The only story here is that this white kid and all of his white friends who were there were depicting white supremacy by chanting at this poor indigenous American who just wanted to sing and beat his drum. Can't the man just sing and beat his drum without being taunted by these toxic white young men? It took some time for more details to come out, but they did. Oh boy, they did. And when they did, the story began to change. Think Liberty is one of the few news sources that waited until the whole story came out before reporting anything about this. Vinnie Marshall, one of the founders of Think Liberty, he has an article on our website, think-liberty.com. The article is titled, What Really Happened at the Lincoln Memorial. And in the video, he talks about this short viral video, and he looks at all of the rapid reactions from the mainstream media. But then he also includes this 2-hour video that was taken by the group that had actually instigated this whole thing. Yes, a group of Black Hebrew Israelites had initiated this whole mess. The March for Life rally took place in D.C. last Saturday. That same day, an Indigenous Peoples March also took place. I'm not sure what business this other group had in D.C. that day, if they were there to antagonize and harass or whatever. But before this 2-hour video was seen, a lot of inaccuracies were reported by the mainstream media. One was that the Covington kids were chanting "Build the Wall," which this full video doesn't show any of that. They said that the kids were chanting "Build the Wall" while Phillips was playing his drum. Another was that the boys spotted Phillips and surrounded him as if to intimidate him. That also did not happen. Phillips actually approached them. This was really being driven in order to frame this as white supremacy culture in America and the oppression of Native Americans. These horrible kids roaming the National Mall just looking for an innocent man to harass. What this 2-hour video shows was the Black Israelites at first harassing the people who attended the Indigenous Peoples March. They were mocking these Indigenous Americans and asking them why they were celebrating, and this grew into them telling these people that God took their land away because they worship buffaloes and eagles. By the way, none of that has been scrutinized by anyone in the media. All the criticism had been aimed at these Covington kids, Donald Trump, and the GOP. The Black Israelites later turned their attention to the kids. They were yelling homosexual slurs at these kids. They were calling them things like crackers and incest kids and calling them future school shooters. And folks, grown men were harassing kids and calling them gay slurs. Any criticism from the mainstream media? Nada. Again, the narrative has to be fixed on Trump and anyone who supports him. Once again, people are making me defend Donald Trump, and this is starting to get really old. But let's talk about this viral video that got so many people upset. This video originally showed up on Twitter and was tweeted by a Brazilian blogger who posed as a school teacher in California. The account handle was @2020fight, with the profile pic being an image that belonged to a Brazilian social media star named Na Cardoso. CNN reported about this account, saying that it helped spread a controversial encounter. No, CNN, this account didn't help spread anything. You did that. You and every other mainstream media outlet. Even Molly McHugh, a person who calls herself an information warfare expert who makes appearances on CNN, she was duped by this Twitter account. But there is some irony to this, because since the 2016 election, they've talked about this country being influenced by Russian internet trolls. These fake internet accounts have been spamming social media with propaganda meant to influence people to vote a certain way. Last weekend, these same people were duped by an internet troll. They were influenced to harass and threaten a group of kids who did nothing wrong. Funny how that works. And yes, people did threaten these kids. The kid in the video who was smirking, nick-sandmann, his personal information was published on social media. What's worse is that you had prominent people asking for his information to be published. You had prominent people saying they wanted to do harmful things to this kid, like punch him in the face. A writer for SNL, a person named Sarah Beatty, who calls herself a comedian, offered oral sex to anyone who could show her a picture of them punching this kid in the face. I was talking with some of my colleagues at Think Liberty the other day, and I was saying about how Sarah Beatty calls herself a comedian, yet I've never heard of her. William Gaston, who's the host of Liberty Bites on the Think Liberty Network, he told me that the reason I've never heard of her is because she isn't funny. And that actually makes a lot of sense, because she's supposed to be a writer for Saturday Night Live. That show has not been funny in a long time. But all over social media, you had people claiming to be nonviolent, saying they wanted to hurt these kids. You can call yourself nonviolent all you want, but if you express a desire to initiate violence against another person, you are not nonviolent. But it didn't stop there. People showed up to protest at the school. School had to be canceled on a Tuesday because they were worried about student safety. Students said they were receiving death threats. And yes, they were receiving death threats. One such threat was that people wanted them locked inside the school and the school burned to the ground. Another was a bomb threat. Jack Morrissey, who's a Hollywood producer, posted a tweet that said, "MAGA kids go screaming headfirst into the wood chipper." And it had an image of a wood chipper shooting blood out of it. Why are these internet mobs so insane? Why do they think it's tolerable to do violence against those with whom they disagree? Why do they think it's fine to talk about putting kids in a wood chipper and post images such as the ones posted by Morrissey? The people who are doing this are disgusting. But when you take a step back and you put this in perspective, the whole thing should have been a non-story. A man approached a group of kids singing and beating a drum. That was not necessary. There was no reason for him to approach them. One kid was directly in front of him and still with a smirk on his face. Okay. Had someone approached me while beating a drum and singing like Nathan-Phillips was, I probably would have done the same thing. My thought would have been, what is this guy doing? There shouldn't have been anything to this. But when you consider all the details behind it, then understanding why this blew up, it starts to make a lot more sense. A group of white kids from an all-boys private Catholic school attended the March for Life rally in Washington, D.C. The kids were wearing MAGA hats, and they were labeled as the MAGA kids. Take all that into account, and the narrative becomes pretty apparent. Toxic masculinity, white supremacy, bigotry, religious discrimination, pro-life. All these factors were a part of the narrative, and people in the mainstream media used this one small incident to highlight all of them, and it grew into a national debacle. Well, a lot of these outlets saw the errors of their ways. Reporters were issuing personal apologies and vowing to not run with the story until they had all the details, which is what they're supposed to do. But even in their apologies, they made it seem like they were trying to avoid blame. Washington Post published one such story saying that a video went viral, the media struggled to keep up, and then the pro-Trump internet pounced. Pro-Trump internet? What is the pro-Trump internet? Are they making it seem as if Trump supporters stay on guard and wait for the media to make one mistake before they go on the offensive? Did the Trump internet pounce on the media the same way the media pounced on these kids? Did the Trump internet pounce on the media the same way these internet mob psychopaths pounced on these kids? Even when admitting they made a mistake, they're still trying to include Trump supporters in the blame. While some media outlets were issuing these semi-apologies, others continued on with their attacks against Covington Catholic High School. Someone dug up a photo of a basketball game at Covington that was designated as a blackout game. This happens a lot at high schools and colleges across the country. It's called a blackout game. People show up wearing all black. Fans of the home team are encouraged to wear all black. It's a way to encourage fan participation and build camaraderie. There's nothing controversial about it. People dress up in all black. Sometimes people will paint their faces and their bodies black. We've reached a point where painting your face black for any reason is supposed to be a symbol of racism. Yes, there was a time during the Jim Crow era when white people would pretend to be black and paint their faces black. People who paint their faces black at blackout games, they're not doing this as a racist gesture. They're doing this because they want to participate in a blackout. The New York Daily News dug up this old photo of one such blackout game. It shows some students who, yes, did have their faces painted black, and they're yelling at a player from the other team who happens to be black. Look, home team fans will heckle opponents at basketball games in high school. I cover high school basketball. I am well aware of this. And it's just heckling. They said that the students were verbally abusing the basketball player. Well, heckling is not necessarily verbal abuse. Do you even know what they were saying to this kid? They did this, obviously, to paint Covington Catholic as a school full of racist kids. What we found out later, thanks to someone who once attended the high school, is that the photo in question was from 2012. Ryan Toller tweeted at the New York Daily News and told him that the game was 7 years ago and students painted their faces black because it was a blackout game. He then told them to stop forcing a fake story to drive a false narrative. New York Daily News wasn't the only one to do this. NBC News published an article this past week about a gay student who wasn't allowed to speak at his graduation because he was denied by the Covington Diocese. The kid's name is Christian Bells, and he told NBC News this week that he wasn't surprised by what happened. NBC News rehashed this old story from last year where he wasn't allowed to speak at his high school graduation despite being the valedictorian. And you have to actually go back to the original story to see why he wasn't allowed. The reason he wasn't allowed to speak is because, one, his speech wasn't turned in on time, and two, they felt it was political and inconsistent with the teachings of the Catholic Church. This kid didn't even go to Covington Catholic. He went to another private Catholic school called Holy Cross. The headline of the story, where he said he wasn't surprised by the video, the headline said he was banned from speaking at a Covington graduation. Misleading headline. He was denied speaking by the Covington Diocese. He didn't go to Covington Catholic. He went to a different school. The headline portrays it as if he went to Covington Catholic. Media outlets also had to issue corrections about Nathan-Phillips. As it turns out, he didn't actually serve in Vietnam the way that they had portrayed. Nathan-Phillips enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserve in 1972. Marine combat units began leaving Vietnam in 1971. But we know now for a fact that Phillips never served in Vietnam because a spokesman for the Marine Corps verified it. We learned other things about his career in the reserves as well. He enlisted in 1972 as a private. He was discharged in 1976 also as a private. I'm not going to sit here and try to relegate his service in any kind of way, but this man already seems kind of sketchy. We know that he was in the infantry for a few months before moving over to utilities. Look, jobs in the military are called military occupational specialties, or for short, MOS. Branches of the military all use codes to designate each MOS. The Marine Corps uses numbers to designate both the MOS field and each individual MOS. So like the MOS code for the infantry is 0300. So for example, the MOS code for an infantry rifleman is 0311. The code for a scout sniper is 0317. For a machine gunner, it's 0331. While Phillips was in the infantry, he was an 0352 anti-aircraft missile gunner. He was in this MOS for what looks like 5 months, from October 1972 to February 1973. After that, he was moved to the 1100 field, utilities. He was an 1161, a refrigeration mechanic. He was in this MOS until he was discharged. I'm not sure why he was moved from the infantry to utilities, and I will speculate as to why. But one thing that we also know is that he never deployed. The Marine Corps verified that. So while he is a Vietnam veteran recognized by the government because he served during the Vietnam War, he never actually served in the Vietnam War. But the media portrayed him as one and had to go back and correct it a few days later. Nathan Phillips, he has tiptoed around calling himself someone who served in the Vietnam War. The way that he's put it in interviews is that he would say, "I served in Vietnam times." He doesn't come out and actually say, "I served in Vietnam." But there is one article that was published by Vogue in April 2018. The person who wrote this article was with Phillips and some other people last February in North Dakota. They were doing this thing called a prayer walk, where they walked 40 miles in the area where the Dakota Access Pipeline is being built. And there's this one place in the article where they're getting ready to begin, and he sends a security team to go ahead. And he said to this reporter, "I have a relative here who said he'd lead the way and scout ahead for us. You know, I'm from Vietnam times. I'm what they call a recon ranger. That was my role. So I thank you for taking that point position for me." Yeah, no, he was not a recon ranger. Spending 5 months as an anti-aircraft missile gunner does not make someone a recon ranger. You know, I'm wondering if a lot of people just didn't see this article when it was first published because no one brought any attention to this. He did something similar in a video in 2018. He posted a video of himself speaking in this video that he posted to the Native Youth Alliance Facebook page. And there's one part in the video where he says, "I'm a Vietnam vet, you know. I served in the Marine Corps from 72 to 76. I got discharged May 5th, 1976. I got honorable discharge, and one of the boxes in there shows if you were peacetime or what my box says that I was in theater, I don't talk much about my Vietnam times. I usually say I don't recollect, I don't recall, those years. You know why he doesn't recollect, or why he doesn't recall the years that he spent in theater during Vietnam? Because he didn't spend any years in theater in Vietnam. In that same video, he states, I got a Section 8 home because I'm a veteran, wartime veteran like that, honorable in theater, so I have Section 8 home. He was never in theater. The media made a spectacle of his military service and praised him for being in Vietnam because it was convenient for them. It added fuel to their narrative against the Covington kids. It came to light that he didn't serve in Vietnam, and they had to go back and retract that. They had to go back and retract a lot of things. For years, some people have been saying journalism is dead. I wouldn't say journalism is dead. Local journalism is still alive and well. Support your local journalism. It's important. Journalists at the local level are doing great work. News at the national level, however, is a dumpster fire. National journalists have an agenda. Fox News, full of right-thinking people, has an agenda. CNN, full of left-thinking people, has an agenda. Washington Post, New York Times, MSNBC, and so on. They all have an agenda. Turn off the cable news. Put down the New York Times. These outlets aren't telling you what you need to know. They're only telling you what they want you to know. They did it this past week with the incident that happened in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Luckily, all the details made it into the public and people were able to see what really happened. But what if something like this happens again? What if all the details aren't being presented to the public? Then what? The only thing to do is to look for the details yourself. They're not going to present all the details to you, only the ones they want you to know. There are people who have said that journalism is activism. I don't think journalism should be activism. Journalism is supposed to be objective. Activism is not objective. Activism has an agenda. Journalism is not supposed to have an agenda. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Political Circus Weekly Podcast.